Greg LeMond, Lance Armstrong's biggest hater, who used to be fine having his picture taken with the guy who slept with an Olsen twin, has spoken out like no other cyclist from the epocha, speaking out about drug use and the three-letter substance in the early 1990s. And he hasn't done it in just any old way. He's done it by taking a pot shot at Miguel Indurain and Claudio Chiappucci and all the stars who crushed him during the Tour de France between 1991 and 1994, when he retired by climbing into the broom wagon, exhausted and totally finished. He didn't call them dopers directly, but on the Roadman Podcast, he claimed that without EPO, he would have won 5 Tour de France, just like his former teammate and arch-rival Bernard Hinault. Harsh words from a man who has battled leukemia and hasn't had to sell bracelets to help people in his situation. A wounded man whose fall into cycling hell began after the end of the 1990 campaign, the year in which, according to him, EPO became widespread in the peloton. By the 1991 season, LeMond was the top star of former doped cyclist and future director of doped cyclists Roger Leger and the Z-Team. However, old Greg recalls that back then the Z-Team had little to do with the future Crédit Agricole and doped monsters like Stuart O'Grady, Bobby Julich or Christophe Moreau. Back then, the mighty French team had no access to EPO, and according to LeMond's own words, even his own teammates knew nothing about this magical substance that multiplied by 10 one's recovery capacity and improved the cyclist's endurance and performance by 12%. It's funny because at that time LeMond was the most popular cyclist with the most money in the world, but he had no access to the best doctors on the planet. Perhaps because he missed the 1988 campaign in the PDM team due to an injury. The PDM team, where the doped Dutch guinea pig Steven Rooks and Gert van Teunissen were the first cyclists to experiment with EPO even before its commercialization in the market. The first moment when the gringo cyclist realized that something was wrong was after the 1991 Giro d'Italia, one of the most doped of all time, where the Coppino, Franco Chiaccioli, achieved the greatest success of his career by winning the Giro d'Italia at the tender age of 32, winning it in a landslide against other Italian monsters such as Claudio Chiappucci, Massimiliano Lelli or Gianni Bugno. LeMond says that although his teammate, Eric Boyer, won a stage and finished 6th overall in no uncertain fashion, he and almost his entire team abandoned the Giro after the second week of racing, exhausted and unable to keep up with the peloton for most of the stages. At first, he put it down to LeMond's classic spring allergies. But when he got home and saw on a machine that his power and speed data were even better than when he had won the Tour de France in 1986, he became very suspicious. That happened to him because he was not subscribed to Cycling Highlights. For then he would have known how Femiano Fuentes passed a briefcase full of vials to Melchior Mauri so that this unknown rider would win the 1991 Vuelta a España over Miguel Indurain himself. Well, there's still time for you to subscribe. However, everything went wrong for good old Greg in July 1991, in the middle of the Grand Boucle. LeMond started, let's remember, according to him, totally clean. And he did it with absolute solvency. He was third in that 1991 Lyon prologue and led the race for a day, and after the team time trial, he was more than 2 minutes ahead of all the favourites, except for the doped PDM of Eric Breukink, Sean Kelly and Raul Alcala, and the Castorama team of the doped Laurent Fignon, the Catholic nut Luc Leblanc, and friend of the channel but then nondescript cyclist Bjarne Riis. LeMond was so confident during the first week of the tour that he was always riding in the lead, and he even told his wife that it was going to be the easiest Tour de France of his entire sporting career, significantly easier than 1990 when he won. Something he was able to corroborate just days later when he finished second in the 73-kilometre time trial, not like the bullshit tests ASO are now pulling. He finished just 8 seconds behind Miguel Indurain. LeMond was euphoric. According to him, this was the best prepared moment of his life, and he was taking minutes off doped riders while totally clean. However, he soon began to see strange things in the bunch. There were no transition stages like in the 80s, where riders gave away stages to irrelevant men like the then nondescript Bjarne. All stages in 91 were ridden at a devilish speed. This was the first Grand Tour of his already long-lived career in which there was no agreed rest day. Greg told how that lack of recovery made him faint in the popular stage from Jaca to Val d'Euron, where Miguel Indurain destroyed the peloton on the Tourmalet. And LeMond himself arrived sunk at the finish line, with only the unsuspecting Eric Boyer as a teammate, more than 7 minutes behind Big Mig and Chiappucci on that day. And he lost the Tour de France, finishing 7th in that Grand Boucle. And that's when, throwing a stone and hiding his hand, he said what everyone thinks about those aliens on bicycles. LeMond pointed directly to doping doctor Francesco Conconi as the great mastermind behind the success of the Banesto team during that 1991 Tour de France, and of Big Mig Indurain himself in particular. Greg commented that the Spanish rider, of course, to him, seems like a good person and a humble guy, nothing to object about regarding the man. But Greg knew that he was a much better cyclist than him, and that he had even given him a stage at Luz Ardiden in 1990, and that evidently in the shape LeMond was in, he would never have lost that Tour de France were it not for the presence of Ippo. He doesn't say it, but he says it. He also claims that Conconi was at that time the Italian Olympic Committee's doctor to prepare for the Barcelona 1992 Olympic Games. And according to what he's read in Stefano Donati's books about the Italian professor, Conconi was doping cyclists as guinea pigs to then take his Ippo plan to the Olympics. A plan that failed in the face of the same Epoca plan of Eufemiano Fuentes for Spain. LeMond, perhaps wanting to avoid a lawsuit from Spain, said that maybe Indurain and the rest of the riders didn't know what Conconi, Ferrari or Cecchini were putting into the veins of these noble athletes. Because, of course, the bad guys are always the doctors, regardless of whoever is documented as dopers. He was especially hard on Claudio Chiappucci and what LeMond called the magical transformation. To him, Chiappucci had always been a domestique, and when he crushed him on the legendary Sestriere stage in 1992 with a hematocrit that flew over the Eiffel Tower itself, he came in an hour behind the red polka dot jersey. And Greg knew something was wrong, and not in his own body. It wasn't until the start of 1993 when the ever-clean Roger Leger told the riders of the now Gann team that there was testosterone, EPO and growth hormones, and that if they didn't perform, he would cut their pay in half. LeMond was the man who, according to him, without the presence of EPO, would have won the 91 and 92 Tour de France over Miguel Indurain. I do find it rather amusing that he insists that he never saw doping in Bernard Hinault's Renault team, the team that skipped a doping control in 1982, or indeed in La Vie Claire, the team where Kim Anderson broke the world record for doping positives in the history of cycling, and whose patron was the legendary French chanteur Bernard Tapie, the same man who hired the doping Kaiser Franz Beckenbauer as a coach for his Olympique de Marseille football team, a team who doped like mules to win the Champions League in 1993, as the briber Jean-Jacques Edely said. Funny, isn't it? It must be that in the 80s, they were all clean.